It's funny how, regardless of the level of quality or technicality in a fighting game, there are some truths that stand strong no matter what game you're playing. You're gonna be hitting the opponent, you're gonna have a big tough boss at the end, and somehow Terry Bogard will be there. One truth that's present in every fighting game with multiple playable characters, though, is that one of them has to be the best. By virtue of how fighting games work, some characters are going to have tools that give them better options, or simply work with the game's mechanics better, and it gives them an edge that it's hard for the rest of the cast to get over. It's not enough to know that one character in BCV Battle Construction Vehicle is better than the rest, you want to know why. I want to take a look at and see what are some of the strangest, silliest, and funniest top tiers in fighting games. Now, before we get into this, you have to understand that we're not going to be hitting any of the major fighting game franchises. No Street Fighter, Tekken, KOF, Guilty Gear, Mortal Kombat, nothing like that. For the most part, those games have pretty normal, consistent, and understandable top tiers that don't really fit into what we're looking at. Oh, Zero's top tier again. You don't fucking say. No, we're going through the back alleys to games you might not have ever heard of, or never knew had scenes dedicated enough to find out what the top tiers even were. Our first subject is rather recent. As in, like, last time recent. If you thought we were done talking about Sparking Zero, you're wrong. Arena fighters have never been taken seriously as real fighting games, with them often lending themselves more to unbalanced rosters and janky mechanics that turn away the hardcore fighting game community. The dream of seeing an Ultimate Ninja Storm game main stage EVO is little more than a dream. But that doesn't mean that communities haven't pushed the issue and tried to get an arena fighter to that next level. Even if they're weighted towards canonical balance over fair balance, that doesn't mean these aren't still games with a lot of mechanical depth that deserve exploration, that they can't have interesting metas that fit their unique mechanics, and you can't turn what's designed as a sandbox into Normandy Beach. The largest community before Sparking Zero was, naturally, the previous Dragon Ball Z arena fighter, Budokai Tenkaichi 3. The scene for this game was, and still is, very large and well-defined, with Discord servers and forums discovering tons and tons of tech and movement options. The top tiers are the usual suspects. Perfect Cell, Vegito, Gogeta, Broly, but the jank that this game is rife with actually lifts certain characters to levels of playability that make them shocking to see so high. If you were looking for characters to cut from one of these Dragon Ball arena fighters, near the top would have to be Super Trunks, his buffed up form from his first fight with Cell. His super attacks are always underwhelming. Seeing as the form barely fought in the original series, he's left with recycled Trunks moves like the Burning Attack and Finish Buster. Would you like Ball? Or Spicy Ball? If you have an unnamed Super Explosion Wave as an ultimate, that's a dog whistle that they didn't give a shit about this character. Not just that, but he's a really bad character to play as well. He's super slow, combos poorly, and while the increased damage is nice, the speed of your combos turns reaction windows into reaction chasms. So he's not cool, not strong, and not good competitively. So then why is he so often seen in high-level BT3? Well, as a super transformation, Super Trunks starts the round with an additional bar of energy. Where most characters get 2, Super Trunks gets 3. You know who would really appreciate that extra bar? Base Trunks, one of the best characters in the game! That's right, Super Trunks is a top tier character because you enter the match, get the extra bar of ki, and then immediately transform down to base form. This gives Base Trunks, the game's fastest character, with some excellent tools like an explosive wave, wild sense, and a tracking rush attack, an extra bar of ki to work with. Super Trunks is less of a character and more a piggy bank that Trunks breaks on the ground at the beginning of a round to get a key bar he's not supposed to have. Believe it or not, that means that when it comes time to put the entire roster into a tier list, base Trunks actually scores higher than Super Saiyan Trunks. The two are practically the same character, save for a minor damage buff with Super Saiyan Trunks, so when it comes down to it, one starts with 3 bars and the other starts with 2. Base is better, but he wouldn't be better if it weren't for Super Trunks. Mentioning base Trunks as the fastest character in the game, there's somebody else who you would expect to have the edge in this discussion, but is just barely edged out. And just like Trunks, he's also in discussion for one of the best characters in the game. It's already great that any individual Ginyu Force member is better than the rest, but when one of those members is in the running for the best character in the game, it starts getting ridiculous. Burter is completely specced into speed. He is the fastest in the universe after all, but in a game like BT3, that's less min-maxing and more max-maxing. Burter's speed gives him the fastest melee starter in the game, with a huge range to boot given how big he is, the ability to change his fighting range at a moment's notice, and follow up off of usually unsafe moves. A huge part of BT3's metagame is about positioning, and Burter's speed makes him a crazy good flanker. The best place to be in this game is behind the opponent, since it massively limits their defensive options, and Burter can get behind them with no issues. Add on top of that, his utility and super moves are all great, with after image to avoid damage, a power up to the max to get him to his ultimate instantly, a strong energy blast, and a good rush means he's not really at a loss to do anything. Even against characters with persistent super armor, namely Broly, Burter can't break that, but he sure can piss his pants. Broly simply can't catch Burter, which makes Burter able to pick when the fight starts. Actually, funny to mention Broly because, like I said, he is one of the best characters in the game. His physical strength is through the roof, his key attacks are deceptively good, and most importantly, he has super armor. And how super armor works in BT3 is actually really interesting. The canonical strength of your character is proportionate to how many hits it will take to break the super armor. So Goku would take about 4, Super Saiyan Goku would take 3, Super Saiyan 2 Goku would take 2, and Super Saiyan 3 Goku breaks it instantly. Of course, if we're talking about canonical strength, there's only one character that sits at the top and can break any amount of super armor no matter what. A gag character. Arale, from Akira Toriyama's previous work, Dr. Slump, and #1 cause of kids saying, "Who the fuck is Arale?" when they play Budokai Tenkaichi 3, is actually a really good character in this game. She's small, fast, and deceptively strong. Her combos and blast 2s both do way too much damage for a character this hard to catch. And of course, whether it be Broly or a giant character, Arale breaks super armor with no issues. Listen, you read Dr. Slump and you find out this is her taking it easy on everybody. Of course, being a character from the Dragon Ball side of things rather than the Dragon Ball Z side of things means she has 2 major weaknesses. A lack of mobility because she can't fly, and a lack of ability to get in easily because she can't use ki blasts. Regardless, she is easily one of, if not the best character from the Dragon Ball side of things, and will see her way into plenty of competitive matches based on how well she interacts with the really strong characters. Now, this is all very interesting, but wasn't this supposed to be about sparking Zero? Well, the reason I wanted to cover these 3 before this was, well, because it was actually interesting. And as for the Sparking Zero characters, they're not. Welcome, Dr. Gero and Android 19. Now, in the grand scheme of Dragon Ball, Dr. Gero is very important. He's the overarching villain of a fan-favorite saga, he ties back into the lore of the original Dragon Ball, and even today, with Android 21, the Gammas, and Cell Max, his influence is still felt. And Android 19 was to the right of him. In the games, though, these two have always stunk. As androids, they can't charge ki, and instead have to either wait to charge up their moves, or fight. These two are unique among the androids, though, for their energy-draining grabs, which allow them to steal not only an opponent's health, but their ki, which gives them a shortcut to get to their good moves. Regardless of how interesting the gimmick is, the two of them have never been impressive to play as, and bottom out at the top of D tier when it comes to competitive play. Maybe feeling bad for the pair, or perhaps feeling a duty to balance out how much people would enjoy Sparking Zero, Gero and 19 were tweaked to make them insufferable. Gero and 19 can't automatically gather ki past the first 2 bars, but those first 2 bars fill up faster than any other character in the game, and they start the round with a whopping 4 of them. Remember how big a deal it was when Super Trunks got 3? As if that ki wasn't enough, their grabs have seen a huge update, with their damage now matching the throws of giant characters, dealing 4,000 damage to most characters 1,750. This throw also steals 3,000 health and up to 2 bars of ki, and adds it to the android's own. They also don't have to waste any ki on dragon dashes, since they don't cost anything on those last 2 bars. This is a trait unique to android characters, and makes them really good at running away. If you do manage to get close to them, it's not like you can do much, because they have the Blast 1, False Courage. This gives the androids super armor on up to 4 physical attacks. And in the time the opponent is trying to break the armor, the androids can set up for a grab and drain nearly half a health bar. And since False Courage only costs 1 blast stock, and you get 6 for turning the console on, Gero and 19 can spam this skill for the entire match, and put themselves in a constant state of super armor. All of these factors bundled together have made these two menaces for anybody who dares to play this game online, especially given the two's incredibly low Dragon Point rating, which means that on a team where you have 15 Dragon Points to work with, they can be slapped onto any team to act as annoying heaters. This would be one thing, but Bandai Namco has made the critical mistake of thinking they made a good game with Sparking Zero, and wanted everybody to see what high-level Sparking Zero gameplay looks like. The Dramatic Showdown Tournament is a 16-person Sparking Zero tournament that's holding its qualifiers right now all over the world, with France having the most interesting ones so far. As to the untrained eye, it's promotion for how Sparking Zero sucks.
Let's see, starting out here, we're flying around for a bit.
Oh my god. Shiryu versus Silliest are at the grand finals to determine who is going to be going to Los Angeles, California for the Dragon Ball Battle Hour, and we are flying.
Right here, neither player wanting to even attempt to approach.
If you have a tactic where it's like, I'm going to burn as much time as I can, I'm running. I'm not fighting. I don't know. I don't know what's going on. Oh yeah, we're swapping out. More sick. What? We're doing it again. Yeah, what is going on here? Come on. Talk.
These guys are like, it's 1 a.m. in France already? Okay, bet. We go until 2 a.m.
I have some questions. I really like flying up and down as well.
Yeah, so how's your day been, Jake?
It's been great, man. I really, I'm really happy. I'm really happy to hang out with my son a little bit later. We've been watching all of Dragon Ball, so it's been a treat.
They cut away from gameplay during Grand Finals. Remember how I said that Dragon Rushes don't cost anything on those last 2 bars? Well, Android players will abuse this fact, and if push comes to grab, time the opponent out by repeatedly ascending and descending until the round ends. This is a popular tactic in online battles, and unpopular with the entire player base. 19 and 20 are able to get a small health advantage, then infinitely ascend and descend, avoiding attacks and making the game go to a timeout, where the player with the most health wins. Ref, technically it's my health that he stole to make his higher. Can we get a tie? To see this strategy used in an official Bandai Namco livestream was a massive embarrassment. To the point they even revoked these two players' invites to the Dramatic Showdown tournament. Should these guys have been punished for playing so lame? Yes, but we'll leave that to God. They broke no rules set out by the tournament organizers, and now miss out on the chance to win big. It's entirely Bandai Namco's fault for allowing these two to have a gameplay style like this, not listening to the fanbase who has been very loudly disapproving and showcasing that this is a dominant strategy, and then hosting a tournament without taking this into account. This was meant to showcase competitive Sparking Zero, and like it or not, it did exactly that. Rarely has a character's playstyle been so unfun to watch that it gets a player in trouble. But it can't be said that it's not optimal. They were both doing this! Right now, as top tiers, 19 and 20 are casting a huge cloud of doom over Sparking Zero's competitive scene. Which is really bad news for Bandai Namco, since they, for some reason, want that to be a thing. And because, heaven forbid, a boy have fun, they just patched a lot of these issues to address the androids, while still keeping large chunks of their game plan unchanged. If anything, it seems like they're going to have to spam false courage and grabs for much longer now, which does add a window of time for the opponent to counterplay, but we're just gonna have to wait and see if this makes like a 17 and kills off Gero. Shrek! Or as you may not know him as, the star of Shrek. I don't think I really need to introduce the idea of what a Shrek is. If you were alive at all in the early 2000s through to now, you know who Shrek is. DreamWorks' crown jewel film franchise, who stayed alive despite no new movies in over a decade and a half, thanks to his presence in online culture. As someone who was most into meme culture around 2014 through 2016, I can tell you this green bastard was everywhere. In videos, in images, in Twinkies. The internet was enchanted by Shrek, and for the life of me, I still can't really tell where it came from. Of course, there's an irony to it, but ironic enjoyment over a sustained period like this is gonna eventually lead to you slipping up and genuinely enjoying something. I don't think any part of the Shrek fandom really exemplifies this quality more than Shrek Super Slam. Shrek video games were super common back when the films were still coming out. Most movies would get a game. Shrek got too many. There were of course the games meant to tie into the movies, the different versions of those same games across different consoles, the handheld games, the educational games, PS1 and Xbox Live Arcade games, which is so anachronistic it makes my head hurt. Shrek DVD Bingo? I'm starting to think that making Shrek games was a cover for something illegal. Then there were the attempts to make fully fledged console games independent of any existing Shrek story, like Shrek Smash and Crash and Shrek Super Party. Each of these served their own purpose, like Shrek Super Party, testing when enough was enough. But they each saw a little resurgence in popularity when Shrek memedom was in full gear. However, Shrek Super Slam is a whole different beast, merging Shrek fans and fighting game fans into some sort of untested chemical weapon. The game upon its initial release got stunning reviews from baby me, as I enjoyed pressing the button that made Shrek go up, but the game largely faded away into obscurity for a long time. Fast forward to that Shrek boom I mentioned, and the game is rediscovered. And the knee-slapping that followed was raucous. Oh my god, a Shrek fighting game? How silly! Oh man, Shrek should main stage Evo. Oh man, I'm setting up side events at my local so we can play Shrek. What the f*** was that? Yeah, the scene around Shrek Super Slam at first was just a joke. People comparing the Shrek Smash clone to Smash, Power Stone Erasure is real, but then things got serious. It turns out that the game's engine and movement were loose enough to allow for a lot of interesting stuff. Unintended tech in fighting games has existed for a long time. be it wave dashing in Melee or roll canceling in CVS 2. But when it comes to Shrek, there's a whole other game's worth of complexity hidden in there. Crumpet dashing is when you cancel out the ending lag of your air dash with a shield, opening you up to be able to attack right out of it and get across the stage with great speed. Swoosing is a jump dash cancelled with a shield and immediately followed up by another jump. And onion boosting is a tech used by characters who can jump after a high wall attack that lets you jump out of it to maintain momentum. And since that doesn't use your air dash or double jump, can be chained together with those to allow you to crumpet dash or swoos. Then you get into more combat stuff like grab cancels, anti-air punishes, anti-air loops, infinites. There is so much more to this game than meets the eye. And of course, in a game like this with so much stuff in it, where only certain characters get certain stuff, there had to be one character that can do it better than anybody else. There are characters like Gingerbread Man, the Black Knight, and Fiona who put it all together, but when it comes to the best of the bunch, well, that's Little Red Riding Hood. Red Riding Hood is the devil of Shrek Super Slam. You can stack the best character in any other aspect up against Hood, and Hood wins. Strength? Hood wins. Speed? Hood wins. Combo? Hood wins. There is nothing in the game she can't do. So what is it about Hood that makes her so much more dominant than the rest of the cast? Well, for starters, she has access to the universal mechanics that most characters do, namely the shield cancels, crumpet dashes, and swooses. The only thing she doesn't have access to is onion boosting, but she doesn't need it. There are, however, some tricks that Little Red Riding Hood and a few other characters are alone in possessing. See, grabs in Shrek Super Slam can be shield cancelled like aerials, and when you cancel them, that leaves the enemy prone for a second as they tumble back to the ground. In that time, you're able to grab them again for a chain grab that only ends when you decide it does. The cancel can also be chained into your anti-air, which in Shrek Super Slam is most characters' best tool. Hood especially gets a lot out of it, as her anti-air is an infinite with itself. If she hits you once, there's nothing you can do, as you're left in the air, juggled without a hope for escape. That means you lose the game on the spot, as the longer Hood keeps you in the air with her anti-air, the more slam she accrues. And once she gets a full slam bar, she can use her slam move, which is what gets her a point. And at the end of the round, the player with the most points wins. Or as we like to call it, the player who picked Hood wins. Two other characters, Luna and the Cyclops, also have anti-air infinites, but Cyclops stinks, and Luna isn't Hood, so the choice is clear. But in case you find that infinite too hard to understand, don't worry. Hood has two infinites that both branch off of her grab. If you cancel the grab and then hit the opponent with a semi-charged apple, which is her special move, they'll be stunned long enough for you to grab them, cancel the grab, throw another apple. Repeat until real-world violence is employed. The air loop takes some level of technical skill to pull off. To let you know how easy the apple loop is, I can do it. And that slam of hers, completely busted. A massive tornado that draws in anybody nearby, which they will be because you just slammed them onto the floor without mercy. That apple special, by the way, isn't just for setting up infinites. It's so powerful that it allows for those combo setups to happen at full screen. Any one of her apples hits, that gives her enough time to make it all the way across the stage and get you into one of her infinites. Without even crumpet dashing, just walking like a fucking commoner. If you watch the few competitive clips of her that exist, you can see that all Hood has to do in order to dominate from the outset is just throw apples around, because the stun you get off of them can convert into a grab. So she controls the entire screen just with a basic move. But wait, why are there so few clips of competitive Hood? She sounds like she's completely busted, so how is she not in every single clip? Simple, really? You can't play as her. Red Riding Hood is so strong and so overwhelming to fight that Shrek Super Slam tournaments have just banned her. They'd rather remove the option to ever even encounter her than think about dealing with her. One instance that made the case for banning her all on its own is this infamous clip between Shrek players Toon and Dan Soup. Dan Soup had been playing the game for years at this point and was considered one of the best players. Toons, meanwhile, had never played the game before showing up to the venue. Dan picked Big Bad Wolf, Toons picked Hood. The mugging that Dan was subject to following that choice was so bad, so one-sided, and so humiliating, he dropped the set, left the tournament, and quit the game forever. How exactly do I know about this infamous story out of the Super Slam scene? That's because I was at this tournament, and I was playing for the first time. That's right, Toons was me. As the metagame has developed, the community has experimented for brief moments on reintroducing Hood into the ecosystem, with a few characters like Gingerbread Man being considered kinda close to her level. Nowadays, it's really a matter of the tournament organizer's trauma as to whether or not Hood is playable at any given event. Now that the Super Slam scene is much quieter after its heyday in the late 2010s, it's hard to reach a consensus, but with other top tiers like Black Knight having counterplay options, she's seen as probably ban-worthy, but it's Shrek Super Slam. Are we really gonna be narcs about this? But we're thinking too small, Gero, Hood, these are pipsqueaks. Let's go bigger. Despite being one of the greatest actors working in our time, Godzilla video games in America and even the world over are kinda sparse. There's a good amount of them in the early days of the NES and Super Nintendo, but you move on to the PlayStation 1, Xbox 360, PS4 and onwards, Godzilla has a shockingly small lineup of games, and even less that are the fighting games you'd want to see. When you're not looking at them as symbols of a post-war Japan putting a face to the tragedy that no other nation has ever had to face that is ultimately overcome not with might but with an ingenuity and work ethic that is central to the Japanese cultural identity, before eventually embracing that same symbol as a part of that same Japanese cultural identity, Godzilla movies are all about big monsters hitting each other with drop kicks. Now, traditional fighting games aren't exactly what Godzilla is fit for. It's a cool idea, and games like Kaiju Daikessen have proven it has legs, but it doesn't feel exactly how I want a Godzilla game to play. I want environmental destruction, I want tag team fights, I want something that this simply can't provide. Luckily for us though, the gringos aren't all bad when it comes to making Godzilla stuff, and in stepped Atari and Pipeworks to make Godzilla Destroy All Monsters Melee. The fuck do you mean this isn't the right Melee tournament? The first console Godzilla game released in America since 1993, Destroy All Monsters is a game that is made with a love for the genre that few games get. It takes its jabs at the cheesiness of the older movies, but doesn't look down on them. The goofy Showa-era movies are just as much a part of Godzilla's legacy as anything else. And anybody who tries to ignore them just to put the focus on his prestige pieces like Shin Godzilla, 54, and Godzilla -1 doesn't get Godzilla. It shows in every second of gameplay how in tune the developers were with what kaiju fans really wanted. Getting to run through cities, mowing through buildings, and throwing the remains, watching the UFOs drop power-ups and interfere with the match, it captures the best of the Showa era really well. Now don't get that twisted as this game being good. It's far from polished and as jank as all get out. But that all gets made up for by the feeling of getting to watch two monsters hit each other really hard. There's a charm to it that doesn't make up for the flaws with the game, but rather makes you much more forgiving of them. The novelty of the game is just too great for me to be able to think critically about it. It's just fun enough that I can laugh along with what the game screws up. One of those things the game screws up at, though, is balance, because the divide between the best and worst characters is an order of magnitudes. In fact, the best characters can usually just flat out negate whatever gimmick the bad characters have. And quite fittingly, one of the best characters in the game is the King of the Monsters. Well, the trademark says otherwise. King Ghidorah. Introduced in Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster in 1964, Ghidorah has been one of the most popular and commonly reoccurring kaijus that Godzilla has ever thrown down with. He's just as iconic as the other heavy hitters of the genre, and might be the second most iconic kaiju next to Godzilla himself, and is a generationally petty bitch.
Oh, so Godzilla's a bad guy in this movie. Well, it looks like I'm gonna have to be a good guy, 'cause I'd rather be dead than on the same side as that prick. Look at him. Bum-ass dad with his stupid little eyes. Fuck you!
Ghidorah in this game is Zoner Supreme. His tools to keep the opponent at the exact range he wants are insane. First off is his Wind Gust, which blows enemies to the other side of the stage, which in a game where grabs are the main damage dealer is a really good thing. Speaking of which, Ghidorah's grab is really good. It's long-reaching, strong, and can send the opponent just as far as his Wind Gust. His ability to fly gives him exceptional mobility since he can dodge over the buildings that can get in your way and slow down your approach, while keeping him clear of grabs. But we haven't even talked about what makes Ghidorah so deadly yet, and those are his beam attacks. You have the grounded charge beam, which has ridiculous spread given how it fires out of all three mouths, but when he's in the air, oh, it's game over. Ghidorah's aerial beam is so fast and so strong, it's the reason you pick up the character. Any other character would kill for a projectile this good, and Ghidorah's whole game plan revolves around it. Anyone who tries to counter-zone him with anything from buildings to their own charged beam doesn't stand a chance, because as soon as you go for it, Ghidorah's in the air and ready to strike. The trade-off is that both flying and your beam use up meter, so you can only keep it up for so long. But luckily for Ghidorah, he has a built-in answer with his dive kick. Usable out of flying, doesn't use meter, and can either end in a land to help build up meter, or go straight back to flying for a follow-up. As for actual weaknesses, his melee damage is only okay. He lacks a fast projectile option on the ground with no tap fire attack, which is just when you tap the beam button instead of charging it. Godzilla gets a fireball, while Ghidorah gets hit with a fireball. And he is incredibly meter hungry. You need to be able to time out your flights and beam usage pretty smartly if you want to win with Ghidorah. Overall, he's a very powerful zoner, and in a game where your close-up options are usually how you're winning games, it makes him a very powerful character and one of the game's best. So imagine if they made him even better. Oh, you thought this section was about Ghidorah? I don't blame you, since I've been talking about him so much, and it is about King Ghidorah, but not that King Ghidorah. No, we're talking about Mecha King Ghidorah. Oh yeah, introduced in Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah from 1991, Mecha King Ghidorah is Ghidorah, after a nasty run-in with Godzilla left him down a pair of wings and a head. The Earth Defense Forces scooped him up, outfitted him with some armor, and tossed him back out for round 2. Whatever the hell they built this guy out of clearly isn't what they built their tanks out of, because this guy is a menace. Alright, so now that he's been roboticized, Sonic style, there are a few buffs and debuffs that come with it. First off is a new, never-ending, unbreakable super armor against light attacks. If you're not going for a grab or a heavy attack, Ghidorah won't so much as flinch, just make a metal tink sound whenever you amuse him enough with your efforts. As well, Mecha King Ghidorah does get a tap fire attack unlike basic Ghidorah. But because he's a mecha character, he's limited to only 3 per round. The tap fire are these little missiles that are honestly easier to read by keeping an eye on the enemy missile count than watching the screen, since they're so small and fast. And what happens after they land? Well, they deal a little bit of damage and stun you in place for a few good seconds and drain your entire super meter. You can only do this 3 times a round, though. You can only slash 3 of their tires. See, it's fair and balanced. Speaking of fair and balanced, which this giant tin can certainly is not, there has to be something at least resembling a downside, and there is. See, in return for that immunity to all physical damage, Ghidorah has a glaring weakness. As a mecha character, that resistance to hit stun is offset by a huge weakness to beam attacks, as they deal twice the damage they would to any other character. Given how Ghidorah is the anti-zoner zoner, this should already be obviously not enough. But what if I told you they had failed so badly at balancing this guy, you actually want to get hit with beams? See, it's a pretty steep cost to take double damage, so in return, Ghidorah has a special shield. A shield that costs meter to use. A shield that negates all beam damage. A shield that actively heals Ghidorah when he's being shot with a beam. His only real weakness can be converted into free health as long as he's blocking. It costs meter, sure, but this is Ghidorah we're talking about. Burning through meter comes with the territory, you should be expecting it. Oh right, this is still the unstoppable zoner we're talking about. The one with the flying gravity beams, amazing grabs, and get off me tools that mean even getting to fail at hitting him is a challenge. With all of this and more, it's no surprise that Mecha King Ghidorah is one of the best characters in the game. Yeah, even with all of that, Ghidorah still doesn't make it to the top of the mountain. He's arguably there, but the fact that there's an argument at all shows just how cutthroat the meta for this game is. You're going up against Rodan, who's great at dodging meter and sneaking in for grabs. Orga, who made grabs his entire personality and can treat Ghidorah like a basketball, and Desutroya, who doesn't really have any light moves for Ghidorah to tough guy through. Any one of these guys could have been the topic for this game, but I gave Mecha King Ghidorah the edge simply for how absurd his upgrades are. Nobody gets half the tools Ghidorah does, and the fact he's still not undisputed best tells you everything you need to know about the top tiers of this game. Now let's take a second here to recognize the real heroes. And that's the people who are sitting there, arms crossed, scoffing and saying, "Pshaw, I knew all of these. I am the center point of the Venn diagram of Dragon Ball, Shrek, and Godzilla fighting game fans." Just got real goddamn quiet in here. The Nickelodeon Super Brawl games are a series of Flash-based fighting games released on the Nickelodeon website from 2009 to 2019, and served as a crossover of the currently airing Nickelodeon shows Battling It Out. The series was developed by various studios over the years, including MP Game Studios, Workin' Man Interactive, and Playsoft, all of whom are now either dead or work with AI, which is like Cordyceps, but for game developers. The original game, Nickelodeon Super Brawl, would also receive several seasonal updates depending on when you played, that came with roster updates to add characters from older shows that still had fan bases, like Avatar and Danny Phantom. This is already more history than anybody could have asked for a Flash-based fighting game on Nickelodeon.com, so maybe let's just be happy there's any history at all. To find out what we're looking for, we have to go to the original game's final revision, Nickelodeon Super Fall Brawl. But once you boot up the game, you're not going to be able to find the character we're talking about just yet. No, to find him, you have to go through the game's arcade mode and beat it with a high enough score to unlock the game's secret final boss. This is a character so unbelievably strong that he would probably beat out every other character we've talked about. A character so unbelievably busted, the developers had to release a patch for a free Flash game you'd play in the school computer lab just to stop him. Ladies and gentlemen, quake with fear as you meet Nickelodeon Super Fall Brawl's undisputed best character, Sheen. Remember Planet Sheen? That spinoff of Jimmy Neutron that thought that Jimmy Neutron wasn't what people were coming to Jimmy Neutron for? Yeah, it might have been short-lived, but it was alive at just the right time to make children's lives a living hell, as they experienced one of the most broken fighting game characters of all time. How the hell is that possible, though? This game only has 2 buttons for punches and kicks, and a double tap for special moves. Well, try to imagine what I'm describing as though I were describing anything else but a Nickelodeon Flash game. Imagine you could describe a Street Fighter character like this, okay? This is a character with an auto combo that loops infinitely, can loop the first 2 hits with such ease that it leaves no opening for a response unless he hits you away, has a full screen dash that is so fast you can't respond to it, can ignore shields, and has a launcher that also combos into itself for infinites. This is just a taste of what Sheen can do, and it's on top of insanely high speed and damage. For being a rushdown character, Sheen's individual hits are so strong that his infinites don't need to go on for very long for him to win. 6 hits does more than half your life bar, and if you throw in a special move, it goes down even quicker. There is seriously only one character in the game with an ounce of counterplay against Sheen, and that's Bessie. Her normals are long enough that Sheen will have some difficulty getting in, but sooner or later she's gonna try to go for her own special move, and that will be enough time to tear her apart. Zoners like Otis and Fanboy have too much starting lag on their moves to even attempt to counter Sheen. Alright, but what's even the point of complaining? It's a single-player game, you can't even play against somebody else, so what does it matter if one of the characters is busted out the ears? Exactly! This is a single-player fighting game, which means that in the event you fight Sheen, you're not playing against a human who can make mistakes and be hit really hard to make him drop the infinite. You're playing against CPU Sheen, and CPU Sheen is unbeatable. You simply can't win, not with inputs this fast, and this is where the actual problem begins. See, children cry easily, and if they're given 15 minutes of computer time to play on Nick Arcade, only to get beaten in 10 seconds by a stupidly hard CPU opponent at the end of their arcade ladder, oh, they're gonna cry. This fucking Wazzler-ass character, what were the kids supposed to do, not shit their pants? The developers of Super Brawl would end up getting so many complaints about the difficulty of the Sheen AI that they had to make the executive decision to patch the game. A Flash game! A Flash game had patch notes! So how did they do it? Did they tone down his strength? Maybe increase the lag on his moves so it can't combo as well? Nope. They took him out. They just removed Sheen from the game and now you don't gotta deal with him. Again, imagine if this were Tekken, and Dragunov was so good that the developers just had to turn him off. You weren't allowed to play as him anymore, and you just had to make do without him. It is so funny that a character like this ever existed. Someone so good that the developers simply threw their hands up and took him out of the game because he was that hard to fight. You know what's even funnier? This is the roster of characters in the previous revision of the game, Super Brawl Summer. And this was the roster in Fall Brawl. Sheen was the only new character added in the revision, which means that by removing him, they basically invalidated the entire update by removing all new content that came with it. But there is hope, or rather fear, as Sheen was introduced into the game's sequel, Super Brawl 2. Now, they did tone him back significantly by changing him quite a bit, but there's only so much you can do to defang a demon. Sheen does significantly less damage compared to before, and his special move was changed, so instead of charging into the opponent, it charges through them, meaning that it didn't immediately lead to a combo. Except you want to know the best part? This didn't help! Sheen is still one of the best characters in the game, and if you can believe it, for completely different reasons. His special move now goes through the opponent? Colossal mistake. Because you just gave an insane rushdown character a free mix-up move that can be spammed infinitely with no drawbacks. Even better, the thing is so much faster than the Super Brawl 1 version that it leads to situations like this where the AI has no chance to react because it simply can't compute what side of the screen you're on until it guesses and gets lucky. This huge speed increase even negates his previous bad matchup, as now Bessie can't get her moves out as fast as Sheen can rush you down. The combo might not be as strong as it was before, but I told you, this is a 2-button fighter, and the other button is a kick move, and Sheen's kick is completely broken. In the previous game, you never had to worry about its infinite potential, since you didn't need it. Sheen was strong enough with only one infinite. The game would be over before you ever needed to use it. In this game though, since you deal so much less damage, it becomes an integral part of your game plan. Sheen in the corner is a 10-0 matchup against the entire roster, since he's able to keep launching you over and over again as you float through the air, unable to do anything. If you're lucky and can shield before it starts, you just let him build free meter as the kick can be spammed ludicrously fast, and allow him to launch his super move, which itself is a fast-acting projectile that can be comboed into. Oh, but that's if you're lucky. If you're unlucky, you'll still die anyway because of this! Have you ever played a fighting game where you can be launched in shield? Despite their attempts to rein Sheen in, he is still one of the strongest characters in the game. The only reason he's not at the top is because every other character that's better than him is a direct counter. Unfortunately, the top tiers of Super Brawl 2 are very uninteresting. These include Skipper, Kyle, and the monkey from Monkey Quest, which is like if Animal Jam didn't have an economy that 24-year-olds could use to scam 6-year-olds out of money. Simply put, they all have projectile spamming capabilities that keep anybody from getting in, especially a character like Sheen who would struggle the hardest. Special shoutouts to Kyle though for having a full screen, tracking, overhead projectile that makes him invincible for the entire duration, which can't be blocked, due to it not registering block resistance, and therefore doing the same damage regardless of if you block or not. Even if he's not the strongest though, he's still one of the best rushdown characters you'll ever see, and one of the only instances I can think of where a character had to straight up be patched out just to make the game playable again.